All right, we're back. I hope you enjoyed the quick break. We're again joined by our CEO, Justin Borgman, who's going to moderate a discussion on the challenges and opportunities companies face with data gravity. We've been able to bring Dave McCrory, who founded the term data gravity 10 years ago, into the discussion, and Ryan Witcomb from Scotiabank. He's also joining the talk to share what a data gravity challenge looks like at an almost 200-year-old company. Welcome back, Justin.
Thanks, Jess. I'm Justin Borgman, co-founder and CEO of Starburst, and I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about data gravity then and now. It was 10 years ago when Dave McCrory coined the term data gravity. He had the vision to understand that while more and more data sources would be created, more teams would start accessing those data sources, and it would be increasingly challenging to move that data. Today, we'll hear from Dave about what's happened since the term was coined and dive deep into data gravity opportunities and challenges at Scotiabank as well. First, I'd like to introduce my two guests. Dave, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Dave McCrory, VP of Growth at Digital Realty, and I coined the term data gravity.
Awesome. And Ryan, if you could say a couple words about yourself as well.
Awesome. So my name is Ryan Witcomb. I'm the Vice President of Data and Analytics Technology at Scotiabank.
Great. We are super excited and thankful to have you both here. And before we get into the discussion, maybe Dave, you could start off and give us a little bit of an overview of why you coined the term and maybe what's changed over the past decade.
Thanks, Justin. At the time that I came up with data gravity, I had been talking to a friend of mine about gravity and physics effects. And at the same time, during work hours, I was researching big data and clouds, specifically infrastructure and platform as a services. And it occurred to me that all of this data would have an attractive effect for applications and services, and that's why companies were making moves with big data and clouds. Specifically at the time, I wrote a blog post that talked about Salesforce doing some specific acquisitions and such, but it led me to think really about how this would affect all businesses, not just large cloud businesses, but anyone in time. And so over the last decade, I've been doing research into data and the effects that data has over time, one of which is data gravity. And those effects seem to come from a few things, one being the closer that you get to the data, the higher the bandwidth and or the lower the latency. So closer you are to the data, the faster the access you have to it. That's kind of a fundamental idea about what's causing that gravitational effect. But more so, there's also the idea of as you have an increase in mass or amount of data, that can have an increase in attraction. But the secret is you also need activity. So you can have the biggest giant ball of data that you can imagine, but if there's nothing happening with it or within it, there's really not that much gravity occurring. So you need the combination of that big mass of data and the activity to occur. You might have a smaller amount of data, but with an incredibly high amount of activity, and that could give you an equivalent amount of gravity as well. So really, it's those two things, and that's how my thinking has evolved over the last decade in looking at different scenarios involving data gravity.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Ryan, maybe you could also talk a little bit about the history of Scotiabank and how you're building your next generation data platform there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Scotiabank, it's been around for, I think it's about 187 years now. In any technology you can think of, we've gone through at some point, and a lot of them still reside there, right? We're still using many of the different technologies that were used 20, 30 years ago. When we take a look at our data journey, it's very reminiscent of a lot of the other organizations out there, right? We started off with our enterprise data warehouse. We've evolved into like an enterprise data lake. What we've run into is a lot of the same challenges with these platforms as a lot of others in the industry have experienced. And when it comes to evolving our application layout or application the way we're actually deploying our software and managing our technology stacks, as we move into that cloud-first mentality, cloud-first business, data gravity is something that we're actually running into quite a bit. Right? So a lot of our core banking systems are heavily integrated into our on-premise data platforms. And with that, a lot of other applications that need that data are attracted to it, and they're leveraging those. But as we want to start to move those applications out to the cloud, we're fighting that gravitational pull, right? So it runs into two pieces. One is that gravitational pull. The other that we're experiencing is if we take our massive data that's currently on premise and we just do a wholesale lift out into the cloud, it's almost like moving the sun out of the solar system. All of the planets that are attracted to that right now sort of just collapse, right? So what we've been doing to tackle these is we're taking a look at a bit of a hybrid approach. So maintaining our presence on premise so that we can satisfy all of those integrations that are currently there, but also enabling the future capabilities in the cloud by having the data that we need to enable that in the cloud. A big piece of this that we're running into is that how do we actually replicate the data, or how do we expose the data though without duplicating it, right? Because we obviously don't want to run into the cost of data duplication at the same time.
Makes a ton of sense. And I think there's probably many in our audience today, certainly among our customers, who are in a similar boat and thinking about it similarly. So I look forward to digging in a little bit more into that in a moment. But first, Dave, I'm curious, in your work, what the data gravity index is, why it was created, and how it helps companies.
Sure. So the data gravity index was created with the intent of giving companies an idea of what metro areas are experiencing high data gravity intensity today, and forecasting which metros will see very high increases of data gravity over the next 5 years. And specifically in the 1.x series, so 1.0 and 1.5, we focus on the Global 2000 enterprises as kind of a proxy for all businesses. We are planning in the 2.0 series to actually break things out a little bit more and provide even greater clarity on enterprise data versus public metros, and we're looking at a few other delineations as well. We've gotten some interesting requests from anywhere from business to government, public sector. If you can think of it, there's been interest in the index so that people can get that idea of where they should be going, what they should be focused on. And so if you're a multinational company and you have data centers in many different locations, or partners or customers that are in these locations, by looking at the data gravity index, you can kind of use it as a guide to understand maybe where you should be, or where you should be increasing capacity or amount of data storage or connectivity that you need in a specific metro area.
Very interesting. Very cool. Well, I encourage our viewers to check that out. When we think of data gravity and we think of the complexity of environments, I think there's probably no industry that ranks higher than financial services and banks. And you mentioned, Ryan, Scotiabank is almost 200 years old. So that's a long time to incur a wide variety of different data sources and data gravity along the way. So I can just imagine the complexity you have to deal with. I'd love to understand a bit more, the business units that have the highest volume, and understand how you're architecting for those.
So I think it goes beyond just volume, but it also goes into the complexity of the data, right? So if you take a look at a couple of the core business units we have, when I started at Scotiabank and I started my career, it was mainly in the capital markets area. So the data volumes there are actually fairly small for the most part. But the complexity is in the velocity of the data, right? So how fast does the data need to move from point A to point B to actually achieve the requirements and achieve the outcomes that we're after? However, when you take a look at the retail business, that's actually a completely different game, right? The data, if you exclude like some of the areas such as like fraud, where it is real time, most of the data on the retail side is slow moving, right? It's either daily processes, weekly processes, monthly processes in some cases, but the volumes of data are significantly higher. So one of the areas in the space that it actually touches upon both of them, and it actually it encounters the challenges of both of these pieces, is something like an AML, anti-money laundering space, where there's a lot of additional complexity, a lot of additional eyes on there from our regulators, and it's required to tie together data from the entire bank all around, and it runs into the challenges of dealing with the data systems that have different needs elsewhere. But how do we tackle those, and how do we actually create and enable this one common centralized function to leverage the common data, like different data sets, but in a common way?
Yeah, AML is such a great use case for highlighting the importance of having a holistic understanding of your business, because it does involve so many different components and you know, exactly as you said. I'm curious, what role does creating abstraction layers play in solving those challenges?
It's quite a big one, right? Because we have decentralized data solutions. But when we take a look at the actual consumers, the analytics that go behind the ML, they don't want to necessarily have to worry about the intricacies of how a capital markets business manages their data versus a retail business manages their data, right? So creating that common data discovery capability, the common cataloging capability, as well as common interfaces to the data. That's really where we've taken a look and expanded the abstraction principles to enable this.
Fascinating. Dave, you know, beyond financial services, what other industries do you spend the most time with? Do you have any examples of companies that you think are finding a great path forward?
There are a lot of different companies kind of that fall into digital realty's wheelhouse. Really, anyone that's looking to connect directly to a cloud provider, for example, but wants to have their own equipment and such would fall into a potential customer. The verticals that we've been looking at especially include financial services, healthcare, manufacturing, really a wide variety, life sciences. And in fact, looking at life sciences, there are a lot of challenges with data in the life sciences space, and they're dealing with all sorts of interesting problems. The particular example I'll give is not directly a digital realty customer, but still a fascinating problem where you have over 30 petabytes of data being generated by a biotech company on the West Coast, and then attempting to transfer that data nightly over to the East Coast for analysis. And you can imagine the challenges of trying to keep it within a window each night after doing all of these analytics and such, and then trying to send the results back. There are a lot of challenges like that are occurring out in different industries that really aren't necessarily publicized, but are very, very real world.
Totally. And what about the government? I'm sure that they have the same types of challenges, but I imagine most agencies don't necessarily have the resources to deal with it. What do you think about that? Does the mandate to move to the cloud put them in a better spot, or maybe make things even more challenging?
I think it's a bit of both. It's I think there are advantages, obviously, to the government moving to a cloud, as far as they don't have to maintain all of the expertise operationally and such, that maybe they can reallocate resources more to security and other things that are incredibly critical. Although I'd argue that the cloud provider security is probably far better than most general company security, cybersecurity, I mean. At the same time, governments are struggling with this increase in need for information, as well as accessibility to a whole wide variety of different agencies being able to interconnect and share data. And that's something else that we talk a lot about, is the idea of connected communities, where if you're doing business with the government, with other companies, and you have partnerships or such, if you can manage to to be located in the same multi-tenant facility, the ability to share data via cross-connect or equivalent is going to be faster, safer, and more secure than trying to transfer all of this over the public internet. It's always a challenge, and I think that governments in time are going to get better and better at it. It's much like the question of, is everything going to be on the edge? So are we going to do all compute on the edge? You hear a lot about that. And then are we going to do all the compute in the cloud? Or are we going to do it in the data center? And I think the real answer is all of the above. There's no one size fits all for all problems and scenarios. Some things are appropriate at the edge, some things in the data center, and some things in the cloud. It just depends on the specific problem.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense to me. Question maybe for you, Ryan. I think cloud native companies are often envied just by virtue of the fact that their data exists entirely in the cloud. They're not dealing with legacy infrastructure and older systems. While Scotiabank probably can't become a cloud native company overnight, what do you think can be learned from the strategies of these cloud native companies?
Yeah, it's actually a very good question. I think the one piece that is that we could definitely learn about is the one homogeneous security environment, right? When we take a look at the companies that are out there right now, Scotiabank included, the security posture and the security standards that we have on premise, while not, they're just as equivalent, just as secure, but they are different, right? From when you take a look at the cloud, how you go about security, there's different challenges which you're trying to solve for between the two environments. And having that one common path enables a faster path towards moving applications between them, right? Dave, you talked about having applications, some of them in the cloud, some on the edge, some on-prem. As we want to start to move applications between these environments, having one common path towards security enables that. It makes it a lot faster, right? I think that's one of the key things that we're definitely looking towards some of the more cloud native companies in terms of how they've actually tackled that and applying that back into other organizations.
That's great. We talk to large companies every day, and there seems to be almost a paralysis between dueling agendas: fast access to data, data accuracy, and data governance. As you think through these three agendas, how does your team work to achieve all three? Fast access, accurate, reliable data, and governance. What aspects are most challenging?
I don't know if it's most challenging, right? We're going through all of them. And in terms of like prioritizing which one is the most important or which one we focus on the most, I'd say it's all of the above, right? We want to make sure that we provide our development teams, our data science teams, our analytics teams access to data very fast, right? And as they're building their models, as they're learning about the data sets, as they're doing more discovery, we continue to add in more controls around data accuracy. We continue to add in more controls around data lineage, data quality, just all of the different and various data governance processes associated with that, up to the appropriate level for the use cases, right? Not every use case needs perfect data. So we don't want to aim for perfect when 80% is good enough. The one piece of that, though, that we cannot sacrifice is the protection of client data, right? So above all, that trumps everything. Our clients put a massive amount of trust in us to keep their data safe, and no business deliverable meets or surpasses that in terms of a criticality. So the actual securing the client data or any data that would put our clients at jeopardy or cause them to lose trust in the organization definitely takes priority.
Makes a ton of sense. And Dave, how do you prescribe companies to think about prioritizing these agendas?
Well, it certainly depends on what the company's priorities are. As Ryan said, security and in some cases, especially if you're dealing with in-client or customer data, is often paramount. At the same time, Generally, we're focused more on what I would call some of the lower level things, as far as network security, maybe providing end-to-end connectivity that's a private connection, something like that. As far as speed, performance, et cetera, the idea of being close to an on-ramp to a cloud if you're trying to do some type of specialized processing or run some type of specialized app that's located in a cloud, being able to have your equipment, your specialized configuration, all running in a secure, physically separated or air gap separated area gives you that capability. So we're focused kind of on facilitating this for companies, but allowing them to do it in whatever way they prefer. So that's really one of the great things about what we do. We bring the platform as far as the power, the connectivity, the high-speed access to clouds, and we also give the capability to add layers of security by, again, giving private connections or physical security with cages or even in some cases, customers that have us build an entire facility just for them. So I would say that's really where we tackle more of those problems today.
That's great. We've been spending a lot of time talking about data gravity, of course, a term that you invented, Dave, but there's a bunch of other terms that we hear thrown around a lot and can be pretty confusing. And so I'm hoping maybe you two can help us with that a bit. There's data mesh, and the founder of that term and concept is actually speaking tomorrow. There's data domains as an extension to that. There's data fabric. It's a bit of a buzzword bingo, and I'm curious if you can talk about how these concepts relate to data gravity.
I'm certainly not an expert on data meshes. Data fabrics the term data fabric has probably existed for 20 years, something like that, in various forms. Going back to some of my earlier days with grid computing, there were discussions of data fabrics and such. Really, the way I think of these things is all about how we access and move data. And that's really more of what I would put as the umbrella with all of these. It's how do you get to data, whether you're creating it, reading it, writing it, or what have you, and then how do you distribute that to other machines or other locations and such. That it's simplifying a great deal, but that's intentional. That relationship to data gravity is the problem of data gravity is having this large amount of data in a location means that locations further away do not get the same speed of access that something in the immediate network will. So they're all related, and you can solve that problem by replicating the data, for example. So you can have replicas of the data, or maybe you need to transfer small portions, or you can shard the data and have portions of the data spread out. There are a lot of ways to solve the problem. It's what you're trying to do. You may need to replicate the data because you have a lot of data coming in, and then you're also trying to do intensive analytics on the data. And if it's large, you can't do all of that in a single store. You have to replicate the data out and then do your analytics on a separate store, because it's simply not possible to do both in one system if we're talking about enough activity and a large enough amount of data. So I think all of these solutions attempt to deal with those problems. Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, so on this, when it comes to buzzwords around a lot of the architectural patterns, I try to stay away from it a little bit, right? You can get into religious wars oftentimes of, well, you must use this one over this one, right? But a lot of it really comes down to, what are you trying to solve for? There is no, I've yet to come across this in my career where one pattern solves all the use cases, right? So it really is about taking a look, understanding the different patterns, understanding the pros and cons of the patterns, and when you're tackling specific use cases, picking and choosing which pieces work great for you, right? It is having the full decentralization what you need to solve this use case, or is that going to cause a lot of other non-functional requirements where the cost of transport is too great? right? Or on the flip side, if you take a look at a data fabric, or let's say that you follow a pattern where everything is fully centralized, you run into a lot of other issues. But for specific use cases, it actually works really well for you, right? So for me, I don't have one stance. It's not I'm a data mesh guy or I'm a data fabric guy, right? It really comes down to what is the problem I'm trying to solve and what is the right solution for that problem.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Well, before we wrap up and run out of time here, I wanted to get some predictions from you two. If the last 10 years was about finding better ways to store and manage data, what do you think is the most important problem to solve here over the next 10 years? Maybe Ryan, start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think, and we've started to see some traction in this space already, but I think we're going to continue to see more and more in the automation space. There's a lot of manual effort that's still spent in terms of data discovery, in terms of classifications, even down to processing and ETL work, right? There's some good capabilities that are evolving right now in some of the cloud spaces that are automating a lot of that process for us. And it's still in a bit of an immature state, in my opinion, but we're seeing very good traction in that space. Certainly over the next 10 years, it'll be prime time, and I think we'll see a big shift where it is not the industry leaders that are on that path, but I think it'll be across the board, right? If you're not using those automation capabilities, you're going to be falling behind very rapidly.
Yeah. Dave, maybe this is coming in your book, but what do you foresee as the major innovation or solution to these challenges in the next 10 years?
Well, I definitely agree with Ryan in that automation, using new techniques, whether it be machine learning and other technologies to better curate the data, is going to become critical. There are a whole host of problems to be solved with that, and also dealing with just the incredible rate at which the data is growing, which makes it more difficult to do analytics and such. At the same time, I think, speaking to the book, there is a lot of value to be had out of understanding how data behaves, how to get value out of that data, and how to really optimize for getting the most value you can out of the data you have. And I think that's something that's going to become important. As the volume of data grows, the expense at maintaining that volume of data is going to continue to rise. Budgetarily, there have been studies that say that out of the IT spend, a considerable portion continues to increase annually to storing data. And eventually, there's going to be a day of reckoning where there just can't be more money spent on storing the data. There'll be nothing left to do anything else. So as that approaches over the next decade, understanding the data that you have in all facets and being able to extract that maximum value out of it, I think is going to become really important.
Amen to that. And Dave, not to put you on the spot, but any information on that publish date for that upcoming book?
It should be by the end of the summer. I'm over 2/3 the way finished the book. In fact, I'm over 3/4 the way finished the book now. So we will definitely see it by the end of summer.
Great. Well, I know Ryan and I will be looking forward to that, and I'm sure many in the audience as well. I want to thank you both for taking the time. This was great. I really enjoyed it. I think our audience did as well, and look forward to speaking with you both again soon. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap for the morning edition of today's content. If you're just joining us, we'll be restarting at 12 p.m. Eastern, so you can catch all of the content then. Or if you really just loved it and want to watch it again, you're more than welcome. Thank you again to our sponsors Immuta, Red Hat, Privacera, Looker, Google Cloud, Blue Cloud, Amazon Web Services, Slalom, Tableau, Trace3, and ThoughtSpot. And come on back tomorrow because you won't want to miss Confessions of a Cloud Migration, the Data Literacy Imperative, both talks on data mesh, and a great deep dive on data governance by Rakuten. Thank you for your time.